I'm going to talk today about a couple of things describing my enthusiasm or my balanced perspective on generative AI. And what I want to do here is provide some context. So people have made it sound as though generative AI is this amazing new thing and we've never had anything like it, and this is the end of the world as we know it, and so on. And I want to try to provide a little bit more balanced perspective on this. So the key thing to remember here is that technology innovation has been happening for a very long time, and inevitably it has both good and bad consequences. A good example of this is Tolkien's classic work in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, where we have the view of industrialization as moving from sort of a bucolic, Shire-like world to a scorched earth world because of the scouring of the Shire. And this is sort of the perspective I'm going to bring to this. So if we go back over the past 1,000 years, there's been 4 major technology innovations that have revolutionized pretty much everything in society and economy and the world. Each of these innovations was a double-edged sword with respect to broader impact, things like ethics and so on. Good example to start with, the printing press, 15th century. This is something that if it had not existed, we would not be here at William & Mary today. We would probably be all in monks with things lit by candlelight doing illuminations with quill pens and so on. So why was this important? Because it enabled the mass production of books that revolutionized and democratized knowledge sharing and literacy. However, it didn't come without its teething pains. So what were some of the challenges? Fake news. Believe it or not, this is something from 1825 when someone used the power of the printing press to disseminate the view that there were people living on the moon. So we were able to spread misinformation very rapidly because of the advent of printing. Something else you're undoubtedly familiar with, the rise of Protestantism and the Protestant Reformation, spreading ideas that would upheave the ecclesiastic order in Europe and so on. Wouldn't have been possible without the printing press. Move forward a couple hundred years, the steam engine, the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, transformed pretty much everything. We could move goods quite a great distance, manufacturing, economic growth. Once again, widespread use of coal led to pollution, problems where, for example, London had a big issue with smog and fog that killed a lot of people and generally had problems with the environment. This also led to tremendous disparity of wealth. I was at Vanderbilt University for 20 years. One of the greatest robber barons of all time was Cornelius Vanderbilt. So not everybody was going to benefit in the same way from the advent of the steam engine. Move a little bit further, the advent of electricity. Obviously, pretty important thing. My mom actually went here to William & Mary as well, and she recalls growing up back in the 40s and 50s where they still did a lot of things by candlelight, because where she was living, which was in places like French Morocco at the time, they didn't have consistent electricity. So imagine what life would be like without electricity. If nothing else, you couldn't power all your electronic devices. It would be a very sad world. So this once again revolutionized daily life, powering industry, communication, modern conveniences, all the things we take for granted today. But it also contributes to pollution. Generating energy from non-renewable sources, including nuclear power, has all kinds of unintended consequences when things go awry, and so on. Now we get to something a little closer to home, the rise of computing and the internet and the web in the 20th century. And obviously this has had a huge impact. I see everybody here has mobile devices and laptops and so on, which allows us to be able to get great access to information around the world and basically helping to democratize access to data. However, there's a dark side. The ability to collect and analyze this data has led to various serious privacy concerns. There are lots of concerns over the years with Google. There's concerns now with OpenAI and all the other AI that sucks up what you interact with, the data you put in, the prompts, the responses, your interests. DeepSeek came out a few days ago, changing the way we look at this. TikTok. These are great examples of people's concerns about privacy. And then there's also this issue about the digital divide, which still remains a problem in some places. But as long as you can pull up in front of a Starbucks somewhere and get free Wi-Fi, you're well covered if you've got a device of some kind. Ironically, there's a bigger issue we're about to talk about, which I call the digital chasm, and we'll get to that in a second. The other problem with the internet, just like the printing press 500 years ago or so, maybe more, it allows dissemination of misinformation and disinformation. And this, of course, is a big deal, especially when we get to election time, where everybody's convinced that if somebody has a different point of view, it's because they've been subject to a Russian hoax or a disinformation campaign or whatnot. So now we get to the interesting one. This is the one that's most recent. This is generative AI and what I also like to call augmented intelligence, which I think is actually a better way to phrase this, and we'll talk briefly about that. So what's this about? Of course, for those of you who have used it, you're probably familiar with this. For those of you who are not yet using it, it is amazingly transformational. It allows us to be much more creative. It allows us to be able to produce unique content. It allows us to be able to solve very complex problems that would have been difficult to do with the resources we had before. I've got way too many examples than I have time to go into, but I'll talk more about that in a second. It fundamentally changes the way we interact with technology by augmenting our capabilities and our potential. The way I like to view this is sort of like an exoskeleton for your brain, much like Professor X with Cerebro if you're an X-Men fan. Once again, and I think this is really important to see the big picture view, generative AI is democratizing access to analysis and synthesis. So things we had before with the internet, with Google searching, that was democratizing access to data and knowledge. Now we're able to access and leverage analysis and synthesis in ways previously completely unknown. And that is absolutely transformational for just about everything that we're doing now and will continue doing in the future. However, once again, it's not all rainbows and unicorns. So generative AI can produce some very realistic looking content. If you want to amuse yourself, take a look at the YouTube page for Brian Monarch, who creates all these videos where he superimposes Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone's face and voice in all your favorite movies. So there's one where they're in When Harry Met Sally, there's stuff where they're into Seinfeld, and it's absolutely hilarious, and it sounds and looks just like Arnold Schwarzenegger singing Julie Andrews songs. So that can be used for good and bad. Obviously, if you start using it to impersonate people and have them say things they didn't actually say, that can be very harmful. You all know the problem with deepfakes and fake news articles and something called voice phishing or vishing, which is a big problem that's already here and going to become worse. Another big issue, what about intellectual property? So all the things that are trained here, this is all stuff that Brian Monarch didn't create. He's taking copyrighted work and then transforming it. Is that okay? Well, it turns out that that's both an ethical and a legal question. And the jury is really still out on a lot of that stuff. There's a whole bunch of lawsuits working their way through the court system that will shed some light on this. But it's important to know that some countries have decided to disregard copyright when it comes to training data for large language models. So Japan, for example, has decided copyright doesn't apply. If you've heard about DeepSeek and the way it was able to do very good training and good inferencing, much cheaper, at least allegedly much cheaper, much quicker than other forms from OpenAI and Anthropic and so on. One of the questions behind that is, were the training sets that were used to train DeepSeek based on copyrighted data that US companies would be loath to do? Was it based on personalized health information, like every electronic medical record of people in China? Was it based on confidential or trade secret information that has been exfiltrated over the past several decades from Western companies and Western agencies? Maybe. Does that give it an edge? Possibly. These are very interesting issues that we have to wrestle with. So this is a very tricky issue, especially in a world where not everybody wants to play by the rules. And something else that I think your generation for sure is going to have to wrestle with is as AI becomes more capable, it's displacing people in a lot of jobs that we used to require people to do. Now, that's totally a double-edged coin. Some things are good. We're making people more productive. We're taking the ability for people to upskill themselves without having to necessarily go back and get a master's degree or an undergrad degree or a PhD in order to be a lot more competitive. Those are good things, and it's actually helping to level the playing field. But there's also what I call the digital chasm, and that is what's going to happen. It's actually happening right now, but it's going to become very pronounced very soon, where the people who know how to use these AI techniques are going to be hundreds, if not thousands of times more productive than people who are unwilling or unable to learn this stuff. And that is happening now. So it's a good time to be involved because it doesn't take a lot to get up to speed. So those are just a few thoughts I wanted to share on technology innovation and their broader impacts. And I'm going to do one other little talk real quick, but if anybody wants to chime in with any questions or comments, I'd be happy to take them.